So what I'm going to be doing today is repotting my procumbens juniper. Now if you look at this tree, the trunk is thin, but this is a refined tree, so it's not really going to get any larger, and it's going to be styled in what's known as the feminine style, as opposed to a big, bulky, heavy trunk. It's not really going to thicken much more than this. We can get maybe a little bit more of a curve with the dead wood on here and only having the live wood growing on one side. But overall, the trunk isn't going to thicken on this tree. It's a little bit more of a thin, narrow, delicate type of aesthetic. So instead of the rectangular pot, which kind of doesn't fit that, what I'm going to do is transplant it into an oval pot, or this kind of clover leaf, slightly elongated pattern. And I think visually this is going to look a lot better on this tree than the rectangular one. It's about the same size. So what I'm going to do is take this out, see how the roots are doing, and then pot it up into this pot. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove some of the plants I have in the pot. Now these aren't weeds, but instead of growing moss on the soil surface, which is what some people do, I have this plant, and I forgot what it is. It's one of those succulent plants, so I don't have to water the pot as much to keep these small plants alive. But what they do is they kind of help create that look of, a grassy area underneath, and it also prevents weeds from growing in here. So I'm not going to remove it too precisely because, being a succulent, it can probably survive with not too many roots on it. Now what I did is I took the wires, I untwisted them, and we're going to see if we can take it out from the bottom here. So when I remove this out of the pot, you can see we have a very dense carpet of roots. Now some people who have seen my previous videos may remember this was the juniper where I did that crazy scale insect treatment, where I basically repotted it, changed out the soil completely, soaked it in insecticide, and then drenched the top in that horticultural oil to try and kill off all those scale insects. And it was the middle of summer, so pretty crazy time to be doing something like that, and just in general that was kind of a huge procedure. But with the proper care, somehow I pulled it off. And so subsequently, I pretty much just grow this. The big secret here, I grow it, of course, in my bonsai soil, which I'm going to zoom in and describe in a moment here, and just give it that organic fertilizer that I use, and tree grows vigorously. So what I'm going to do is probably have to cut off some of these roots to fit it inside of its new oval pot. So I'm going to go ahead and rake some of these out. So I've got the pot wired up with the screens in the bottom and the wire to hold the tree in place. Now I'm going to have to change the shape of this root ball into an oval one to fit it into the pot. So what I'm doing is I got my stick here, and I'm just loosening up all the old soil, and we're probably going to remove some of these roots. But for right now, I'm just going to loosen this up as much as I can. And I'm going to zoom in and show you what I'm doing here, because what I want to avoid is just ripping all these roots away. Even though we're going to be cutting them off, you never know what you want to save and how the overall tree is. Sometimes there's like a pocket of soil and all the roots are on the outside. Sometimes it's dense throughout the entire root ball. So you just got to see. So let me show you the technique, the crazy secret technique that I'm doing for this. Okay, so the way that I work on the roots is I get a chopstick, and this is actually a skewer. It's thinner, and I chopped off the pointy end, so it's just a little bit pointed but not sharp. And what I'm going to do is use, my hand to help loosen up the soil, and then take this chopstick kind of gently. You don't want to start tearing all these roots off, but kind of work it down into the soil, then do this circular motion where it's loosening up everything in here. You kind of, shake it a little bit, break this up. Just think about it as you've got a bunch of tiny rocks tangled up in the roots. So you just start shaking it off so the rocks fall away, and you're left with the mat of roots. Now as we work away, I'm going to kind of just chop off some of the sections here, work my way a little bit back in, do this around the entire root ball, and then we're going to see how to chop it back to size once I measure it up with this pot again. So now what I'm going to do is get these wires out of the way, take the bonsai soil, and I make this myself, and we're going to do a little hill up here just so when we put the roots down on there are no air gaps. It flattens it out and takes up any, cavity or pocket that may be on the bottom of the tree. Now I probably don't need too much. This root ball is pretty thick. And so this is the mix that I use for most of my conifers. It's a mixture of akadama, pumice, and then pine bark. And this is kind of the secret recipe, you know what I mean? Everybody has their own bonsai soil recipe. And this is, pretty much just the traditional one. But what I see a lot of people leaving out is the pine bark. Now, the reason I like to add it is because I think a lot of conifers, they benefit from that mycorrhizal fungal growth that occurs on the roots. And the decomposing pine bark, it kind of helps. I'm going to take some of the old soil and mix it in just because it's going to have some of that inside of it already. And then any organic fertilizer we add is going to improve that. So I've got my scissors here, and I always wipe these down with isopropyl alcohol now, just to prevent any kind of fungal diseases or anything getting from plant to plant. And basically, I'm just going to cut off large sections around the edges. We're not going to need that. And I mean, I'm pretty confident this is going to grow vigorously as soon as I start fertilizing this year anyways, so there's not really a huge reason for me to save a large portion of these roots. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it back a little bit more into a circular shape, just kind of taking off a little bit on the edges. Not a whole lot. Like I said, this tree is being refined. It's kind of in the later stage, so we're not going to have any super thick roots down here. There's not a lot of root work to do. Pretty much we're just maintaining the root ball at this point, and so we have it fitting. Now, there's still kind of just all these dense areas, so the new soil would only fill up around the outside. I'm going to see if I can do one more final run through with this chopstick here just to open up any loose soil closer to the trunk, just so we don't have anything that's like super hard akadama decomposing in there. We're going to remove it as best we can to give the entire root ball a fresh new soil layer, or at least as much as I can. So now that I have it placed in the pot, it's slightly offset. What I'm going to do is I angled it a little bit more, so I'm packing the soil underneath this side of the root ball, and that kind of gives it a little bit more asymmetry in the back there, in the front. And then all that's left is just taking the new soil, and I don't dump it in all right away. I dump in a little bit, make sure I get that all around the roots and underneath it. Make sure there's no air gaps. And then I'm going to add another layer, do the same thing, let it all settle. You can shake the pot a little bit, sometimes that helps. And I'm going to get it around the back here.
All right, so the process from here is pretty much rinse and repeat. I'm going to add more handfuls of the soil and use the chopstick to push it all down amongst the roots, break up any pockets of air or any gaps, and get all these rock-like pieces settled down into the pot. We can do that all around the edges, and remembering to go into any places I opened up towards the center of the tree. And then once I brought it outside, I added my fertilizer for the springtime. I just used Dr. Earth, and then the evergreen tone. I get empty tea bags off of Amazon. I fill them up with the fertilizer. So I did one of each, tied them up, placed them on the soil surface, and now I'm going to water it in very well. This is, of course, more watering than I would normally do, but that's just because this soil is dry, so it will probably absorb a lot of this, and it runs through very fast anyways, since there's not much organic matter. So I soaked it for a bit and added on some plastic wolves that I got from Hobby Lobby just to make it extra tacky with its new pot, but I don't know, looks good to me. So that's just how it's going to be for the moment. I'm excited for that sedum, I believe it is, that succulent plant to grow and cover the surface there. But that's going to be the juniper repotted for today. I really like the way the pot came out and pulled this whole thing together.